recording. So, good morning. Hello to you all. My name is Maria Rita. I'm the Executive Director of Anjos do Brasil, a non-profit organization to foster angel investment. I welcome you all to the last 21 edition of Café com Homus, an initiative of Anjos do Brasil and Israel Trade and Investment, which brings big names in the Israeli innovation ecosystem to share their vision on issues related to venture capital and the startups, in addition to discussing the potential of business and investments between Brazil and Israel. If you want to know the reasons for this beautiful name, Café com Homus, I invite you to watch the event in which we received Eugenie Candel. It's on Anjos do Brasil YouTube channel. We have a lot of interesting material in all the editions. Feel free to see and share with your contacts. Anjos do Brasil and Israel Trade and Investment had a long partnership. We organize investors' missions to Israel. Next year, we are going to be there. We are hoping that this will work well. But we also organize events like this and a lot of connections between entrepreneurs and investors. We are certain that there is a huge potential for business that adds value for both our countries. We love to talk innovation and the VC ecosystem things, but they are not abstracted and they only exist due to entrepreneurs, men and women that add a lot of work and good ideas and bringing new solutions to the world. Today, we receive one of these entrepreneurs, Didier Toubia. To welcome and introduce our guest and talk a little bit about the work Israel Trade does, I will give you Tsahi Haj, the head of the Israeli Economic and Trade Mission to Brazil. Tsahi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's a pleasure being here again with our Café com Homus initiative. Bom dia a todos. Hello, everyone. My name is Tsahi Haj. I'm the Economic Counsel in São Paulo, managing the trade office. And we, the trade office, are here to facilitate and support Israeli and Brazilian companies to promote collaborations, to promote trade, to solve different regulatory barriers and problems that you might face while trading between the countries. Nowadays, with the epidemic, a lot of our work is being done digital, but hopefully we're going to be starting 2022 in a very different situation, being able to do physical activities again. And as Maria mentioned, we're planning a delegation to Israel, and we're hoping that this will be just one out of many different activities to connect between the innovation and the investment ecosystem in Israel and Brazil. This time, I have a very great pleasure to introduce a very innovative startup from Israel, Aleph Farms, which, by the way, was part of a very unique program that we initiated here in Brazil called Scale Up in Brazil. It's a program that is done in collaboration with Apex and ABVCAP. And during this program, we provide the companies with a lot of both intelligence, knowledge of how the Brazilian market operates, as well as a lot of business development to support and open doors for them. So with this, I would like to welcome Didier Toubia, the CEO and founder of Aleph Farms, to share with you some of his thoughts. Didier, the Zoom platform is all yours.
Thanks a lot, Maria, and thanks, Tsahi. It's a great opportunity to be here with you, and we're honored to be part of this great event in Brazil, which is an important market for us and very strategic when we look at our global expansion. So what I had in mind for this event today is really to introduce myself briefly and maybe a few background information about Aleph Farms, and then to explore a bit further the unique opportunities in Israel and in Brazil, and for the opportunities for combining those unique attributes we can find in both countries. And I'd be very happy to take questions, any questions you might have in the second half of the the event. And you can also, I believe, use the chat if you have some questions in the meanwhile, which we can then read and answer. I'm myself a food engineer and a biologist. I've started my career at the IFC, the International Finance Corporation in Africa, and I came to Israel a relatively long time ago from France. My goal when I studied food engineering was really to tackle global issues with malnutrition and food security. Meaning I had quite of a purpose behind going in this direction. And after over 20 years, I completed my studies and have been confronted with some of those issues in Africa. I co-founded this company, Farms, with the Technion and which is the Israel Institute of Technology, and with the Strauss Group, and with the support from the Israel Innovation Authority, which is a governmental program for funding early stage startups. The incubators, the famous incubators program of Israel. And actually, Farms is really for me a way to drive and impact on many different axes. On one hand, the food system today is really facing some of the most pressing challenges in terms of long-term sustainability. And the food system as a whole is responsible today for 31% of our global greenhouse gases and 53% of the methane emissions. And meat is really considered the most resource intensive and the greater emitter of greenhouse gases within this system. It uses 70% of the fresh water we throw every year, and agriculture is also using 70% of the lands which are used by human beings on the planet, either for growing crops for food or growing crops for feed. Between 33 and 46% of the crops harvested every year are intended for animal farming, for animal feed, sorry, and farming animals. And in order to really make sure that we go back to stem balance with our natural resources, we need to manage a transition of the food system, to which the key is really the meat sector. The current farming practices, which are improved practices which have been developed over the course of the last hundreds of years, were in our views very well adapted for feeding 1 billion people in 1900. Today we're close to 8 billion people, 7.8 to be accurate. And as the population of the world is growing, there's a limit to which we can scale up the existing production systems based on some animals, increasing the yield and increasing also the impact. And we're really getting to those limits today. So the idea is same as at the time, at the end of the 19th century, when the cities grew up and became bigger, the transportation could not continue and they rely on animals. Cities were too big and there were too many horses in the cities. It was not manageable, and we had to evolve toward different systems for performing the same function. Here again today, we do see that we can't just scale up the existing systems. We need to incorporate new production systems as well. Can you hear me well? I'm seeing a message here. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Good, very good. I wasn't sure, I saw on the chat that there might be a microphone problem. So if not, that's perfect. And cultivated meat is, in our views, a new production system which will supplement the meat production based on animals, which in our views should revert to more sustainable, extensive, grass-fed practices only, everywhere where it's possible. And we need to incorporate more, let's say, we call it transformational innovation, new production systems, beside animals to make sure that we can, on one hand, keep up with the increased demand for animal production and animal products, while keeping this balance with nature we mentioned. I feel very lucky to be part of this journey. We're working very closely with the meat industry, and this is why Brazil is important for us. The first product of Ale Farms is a thin cut of beef. Brazil is, if I remember well, my data is the second largest beef producer in the world and the first exporter of beef. So from our standpoint, Brazil is very significant. It's also a very large country by itself, with a lot of activities around alternative proteins, primarily plant-based so far, but we believe cultivated meat can have a great role as part of this evolution of the meat sector in Brazil. And we've been very lucky to be part of this Scale Up in Brazil program, which has been very insightful, and which brought us additional insights beyond the collaborations we already have in the country. Ale Farms is proud to partner with the BRF, which is a long-term partner of Ale Farms, also an investor in the company. So I can share a few slides and spend maybe 10 minutes to give a bit more details about the company itself and the vision. Ale Farms work very closely with international organizations. We're part of the Tech Pioneers program of the World Economic Forum, but we work actually also very closely with the Food System Summit of the United Nations. We actually launched our white paper. I'll talk about it briefly afterwards at the pre-summit in Rome, where we also organized a side event, and we organized the United Nations dialogues. We're working closely with the FAO which is also based in Rome, on global policy making for the meat sector. And we're working hand in hand with different governments and different jurisdictions in order to think together how to incorporate this type of innovation into the existing farming ecosystem. We've been recognized by UNESCO, by NetExplo, which is an observatory of UNESCO, as one of the 10 leading sustainable companies of last year. We're headquartered in Israel, and we have offices in the US, in LA, and in Europe, in Paris. And what I wanted to pinpoint here, and that's coming back to Israel, one of the reasons why Ale Farms wouldn't have been successful elsewhere, it's because Israel is great at this integrating an ecosystem around innovation. Ale Farms is a great example, a great case of collaboration between the industry and the Strauss Group. We've been collaborating with the Kitchen Hub, which is the innovation arm of the Strauss Group. Has been co-founded by Professor Levenberg from the Technion, the Israel Institute of Technology, so a university, as part of a program led by the IAA, which is funded by the government. And this is a triangle of industry, academy, and governmental support, which promotes tech transfer, and which is cementing this ecosystem, works very well in Israel in most of the cases. And in the case of Ale Farms, we wouldn't have been able to start the company without those foundations. We've also attracted relatively early VC investments from Israel, but also from abroad. And we have from Israel Peregrine Ventures, which I also invested in 2017, end of 2017, few months after the company actually started. Our first product is a thin cut of beef. You can see a picture here on the right. And we're in the process of initiating the operation of our first production facility, which is in Israel. It's a pilot production facility for our thin cut. We should be ready for an initial launch around the end of 2022, pending regulatory approvals. Meaning it's difficult to give exact timelines for our commercial activities because it's not completely in our hands. We're working very proactively with the regulatory bodies in different countries. In some countries we're more advanced, in other countries, same as in Brazil, we're still in the process of learning the environment and educating the regulatory bodies. But in principle, we do see a lot of interest from different agencies, thanks to some specific benefits cultivated meat might have in terms of transparency and traceability of the whole supply chain, but also in terms of not using antibiotics in the production process as we grow meat in a closed system, and having a meat which incorporates zero pathogen by definition, because it grows in a sterile environment. So what is cellular agriculture and what is cultivated meat? I assume that if you are here today, that you do have some sense about cultivated meat. Cultivated meat is about reproducing the same natural phenomenon of a steak, which is basically a muscle tissue growing inside the animal's body, but on the outside under controlled conditions. So technically, we're not really a meat alternative. It's not like a plant-based product, which is made of uniquely of plant-based ingredients, as its name suggests, soy or wheat or pea, which are processed to look, feel, taste as closely as possible to meat. We're not that. We do incorporate the same building blocks, the same cells, which are the tiniest living entity we can find in any organism, and which compose the meat we know. We incorporate the same building blocks in our meat, and so technically we are a different type of meat. We will never be exactly the same as the meat which grows inside the animal, because it grows on the outside, so it cannot be 100% the same conditions. We're reproducing as much as possible the same physical, nutritional environment. But we do consider it as a different category of meat products. So it's meat, but with its own set of attributes, and we're developing our own value proposition around this new production method. So it really starts with watching nature, and same as 10 or 12,000 years ago, people watched animals reproducing and growing in the wild, and they successfully incorporated this natural spontaneous phenomenon into a controlled environment through domestication. We implement the same idea on the edible part of the animal liver. We watch the cells dividing and organizing themselves into a steak, into meat inside the animal in nature. And we know how to isolate the cells which have this capability of making meat. We sample the cells, we isolate them, and build what we call a cell bank, which is actually a few small vials with cells. It starts with a few ones, and then we have more and more, and we can have actually hundreds and thousands of small vials with the same cells, which we initially divide, and then each time we produce meat, we just thaw a few cells. And then we incorporate them into a piece of equipment, which we call a cultivator, which is actually mimicking the cow. We provide the cells with the same nutrients as in nature, the same micronutrients, and the same unique proteins brought by the animal itself, such as what is called serum proteins, which are in our case known from animal sources, like transferrin, insulin, albumin, growth factor, so that the cells feel at home. and continue to divide and form this tissue. In order for the cells to arrange themselves into a structured piece of meat, they need to adhere onto a matrix. In nature, it's called the extracellular matrix, which is made of collagen primarily, which is an animal protein. In our case, we have no animal inputs except for the cells themselves. So we replace this collagen with plant-based proteins as a support structure, and the cells adhere onto it and align and interact, grow together to form a similar muscle tissue. So you can see here one of the products we have shown recently, which is one of the two platforms we have developed. And the underlying challenges behind cultivated meat in our views are two. The first one is to scale up this production process at a cost which makes sense in the food industry. And the second is the marketing challenge, how to get the product right and to position and market it right. And this is important because actually cultivated meat has a set of inherent potential benefits versus meat which is produced in intensive or concentrated operations of animal farming. We use a fraction of the resources. Instead of feeding a cow for 1.5, 2, 3 years, we can just grow the cells within 4 weeks with exactly the amount of nutrients, water, energy required to make the steak itself. We believe we can reduce the amount of water by 78%, the amount of land used to grow the crops for animal feed and to farm the animals themselves by 98%. And by using renewable energy, we can inherently reduce the carbon impact by 92% in average. Again, there are different types of processes. We can also grow meat, as I mentioned before, without any antibiotics, because it grows sterile. And we avoid animal welfare issues which might be associated with the concentrated operations for animal farming, like feedlots in the US or in certain countries. On the other hand, we do believe that cultivated meat should drive acceptance based on its own attribute as a product. It's the merits of the product itself, and should not drive acceptance only based on its different production process. The product has to be great and has to fit into the food culture trends. And we do believe that there are some inherent marketing dilemma which we're still addressing and solving. But I will start with a scale-up challenge. Actually, we do have completed the first production facility, which will serve as an intermediate phase for us to really optimize the process before we go to large scale. We call our production facilities biofarms. They will be fully automated and controlled facility with no contact with animals, and just cells which would be incorporated into a closed system. The company has developed 5 different unique technologies to accelerate the decrease of the cost and to make the increase in scale easier. There will be economies of scale with cultivated meat, and one of the challenges will be to grow quickly enough in order to activate those economies of scale quickly and quickly get to prosperity. We have a plan at Alle Farms to reach prosperity within 5 years from initial launch, which is actually approximately half the time it's taking to the new generation of plant-based products to get to prosperity. So we believe we can get to the same point quicker. But of course, we're still in the initial phases of transferring our product to production and initial phases of scale-up. So it's still to be delivered in practical terms. On the marketing side, this is a note we co-authored with the Harvard Business School, which you can download. We believe that cultivated meat should focus first on higher end products and not a commodity kind of ground beef, ground chicken, meat products, in order to be able to drive acceptance based on a higher level of experience, but also to have a positive gross margin relatively early in the commercialization process, because inherently the production cost will be relatively high to start with. And this brings us the driving the scale brings me to the impact. Actually, we believe cultivated meat has the potential to drive a significant impact in the food system. And the issues at stake here is that on one hand, the global meat consumption continues to increase. It should increase by 50% until 2040, primarily driven by Asia, but also the US and other parts of the Americas. It's probably stable in Europe, depending which type of meat. Globally, it continues to increase, and we should eat a record amount of meat this year. While we're really getting to the limitations of our existing systems in terms of climate change and loss of biodiversity, we lost 30% of our arable land over the course of the last 50 years because of intensive agriculture. And again, a large part of the crops are intended for animal feed. We're talking about public health crisis in terms of resistance to antibiotics. A large part of the antibiotics used globally today are used for animal farming, causing mutations and creating superbugs. But we're also talking about potential zoonotic diseases. I just read a report recently about 8 strains of avian flu, which are currently found in intensive farming facilities for poultry, which have a high zoonotic potential, which is really striking and is puzzling. And we've seen more cases recently of mad cow disease, including in Brazil, by the way, which is a resurgence of this disease we've seen in the 80s. We've seen the African swine fever, which has been devastating the pork and swine industry over the course of the last 3 years, especially in Asia, but not only. And last but not least, the quality and the nutritional quality of animals which are found in intensive practices is inferior to the nutritional profile of animals found in sustainable and extensive or grass-fed practices. That's another issue in some countries. And last but not least, in our views, the food system today is not hasn't been designed to feed the people. And I'm a bit provocative here, but on one hand, we throw away 30% of our food globally. And on the other hand, close to 900 million people don't have enough food for a living. And actually, that shows how the existing food system does not work well. And we need to rethink the way we manage our food system in terms of having better control over the production, less waste, and producing the food when and where it is consumed. Cultivated meat can provide a great solution for that, as we can produce meat independently to the local availability of land, water under any climate, and have much shorter production cycles and produce the meat where it is consumed, less relying on imports and exports, and being more resilient to climate. COVID-19 has accelerated a lot of trends in the food system with more focus on resilience, more digitalization and automation, and stronger focus on food security. I talked about it, especially in Asia, but also in the Middle East, even in Europe. We're working very closely with the European Commission, and we've been part of providing comments to the recovery plan of the European Union, which has been developed following the outbreak of COVID-19 last year. But also we see an acceleration of carbon neutrality, which is within carbon neutrality plans and targets, which is part of this Build Back Better movement. And a lot of the recovery plans in the US, for instance, will be directed toward a green transition of the economy. All that is very much in line with what we do at Alphams. We've been the first company in the space to commit to be net zero carbon emissions by 2025, scope 1 and 2, and 2030, scope 3. You can, that's actually, I want to finish here. You can also download in our website our white paper, which we published 6 months ago, which is explaining a bit more in details our approach for an inclusive transition to sustainable and resilient meat industry. And the key here is obviously to look at different tools. We do see cultivated meat as one of the tools which are available in our toolbox. Cultivated meat is not a silver bullet, and it's not the solution. It's one approach which we believe, if combined in a smart way within the existing ecosystem, beside regenerative agriculture and sustainable agricultural practices, in collaboration with the farmers and integrated within the meat industry itself. We're talking about BRF. In the US, we're working closely with Corville, and we have other partners in Europe and in Asia, can have a significant role in leading this successful, just and inclusive transition. So to conclude, I would just say that next time you're eating your steak, you can actually imagine yourself in 5-10 years in front of a choice between eating a steak which is harvested from the carcass of a slaughtered animal, the conventional way, and eating a steak which would be cultivated outside of an animal. And I hope that this reality will come relatively quickly. We're working very hard on it.
Didier, thank you so much. I think this was an amazing opportunity for all of us, to learn a bit more about this market that we've all heard a little, but I think it was just incredible to see you break down what this really is about. I'd like to invite everyone in the chat again to ask any questions they might have, also in Portuguese, and we can definitely translate for you. And I'm going to start asking you the first question we have here from Luis Francisco Costa Vaz. And his question is that, thinking about climate change, the increase in herds can cause carbon emission problems. Wouldn't the solution be more viable as a complement to the production of animal protein in countries that are unable to have a herd that meets their demand?
I'm not sure I got the exact point of the question.
I think Luis can correct me if I'm wrong, but he also followed up that in the state of Pará, they talk about the climate impact reduction. But if in European and North American countries can continue exploiting our country. So I guess what he's asking if this would be more of an increment to what we already have as a production, or something done on the side, I guess.
Yeah, the way we look at cultivated meat is to incorporate it as a supplement to conventional animal farming. On one hand, we've seen a strong trend in the developed world in Western countries for reverting toward more regenerative agricultural practices. In the US, for instance, Corville, which is one of our partners, committed to revert, I believe, 10 million acres of farmland to regenerative agriculture by 2030. PepsiCo also is investing very actively in the space. In Europe, Nestle is committed to invest billions of dollars to turn the supply chain into sustainable supplies. In Europe, we've seen the farm to fork strategy calling for increasing the share of organic products from 7 to 20%. And we see a stronger push in many parts of the world to push back a little bit from industrial farming practices and incorporate more sustainable regenerative practices. Those practices are less productive many times than industrial farming or intensive farming. And we need to supplement those with additional production systems, which might be cultivated meat, it might be also fermentation-based or algae. Some companies are promoting insects as a source of protein. I don't know. It might also be a good solution. The idea is really to think on the systemic basis, on the system, on the base of the whole system, and to try to work together with the different stakeholders to optimize the system, to keep animal farming, but to have less animals, better managed as part of a more regenerative type of practices, and to complement that with new systems. And to your point regarding the US, Europe, and Brazil, we believe that Brazil should be an active player in this transition. Brazil is a superpower of agriculture, and in order to keep its leadership, its global leadership, I believe it needs to stay abreast of innovation and be also a pioneer in this new form of domestication and incorporate it in its ecosystem. I hope it answers the question.
It was really great. Thank you so much. And I will use Jessica's question. Jessica asks, what do you think is the consumer, it is that the consumer wants when consuming the cultivated meat? And if you can elaborate on that, and also one of the things that I'm really interested in hearing is how startups can use the behavioral change that we are seeing in the world, and that the pandemic has accelerated it. So if you can ask both Jessica and my question, it will be great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, we've performed a lot of consumer surveys, including in Brazil, together with the BRF. It hasn't been published yet. And we see that in major countries, that Brazil, the US, the UK, approximately 80% of the consumers are open to cultivated meat, which is relatively high for a product which hasn't been marketed yet. And we do see a difference between the generations. The younger generation, especially the Gen Z, meaning born after 1995, is definitely the locomotive, really the driver of the change, with over 90% of expected acceptance, and with the motivators which are many times articulated around sustainability and ethics. While among the older population, the primary drivers for wanting and trying cultivated meat are more focused on health and nutrition and food security. Cultivated meat can help monitoring the nutritional profile of the meat and certifying the amount of fat, saturated fat, and the fact that non-antibiotics is used is also important for some part of the population. So we do see overall a strong expected acceptance with different motivators among the different generations, and the younger generation being more proactive about it. We do see an acceleration of this trend following COVID-19, and that's the awareness about environment and climate change has been great. We've been, for instance, part of COP26 last month in Glasgow, where we talked at different panels, and we've also organized our own event. And we're at COP25, which was 2 years ago. COP last year has been cancelled because of COVID. And we see the difference, between COP25 2 years ago in Madrid and COP26 in Glasgow this year. The amount of coverage, of interest, of engagement has multiplied 10 times. And that's definitely the result of the global pandemics. And that's definitely giving a lot of tailwind to this transition toward a more sustainable world for ourselves and for our children.
Interesting. Didier, actually, Jose just asked the question, and I was going to ask you something along those lines. You talked about regulation and how it's different in each country, but I wanted to know, and Jose is asking as well, if once you left the lab, the more scientific setting, you faced any ethical or moral or religious barriers when it came to the cultivated protein? Or do you think that being in Israel maybe helped you, be in a more open-minded environment?
Mm-hmm. And that's a great question. We believe that cultivated meat is solving some ethical questions, especially with the concentrated operations of animal farming, in terms of how the animals are raised and slaughtered in an industrial manner. In my view, I think that we kind of lost a little bit the connection with the animals over the course of the last 50, 60 or 70 years after the Second World War with the industrialization of agriculture. I grew up in France, and 100 years ago, when an animal was slaughtered, usually swine or sometimes beef, it was a ceremony. It was an important event, and there was a real connection with animals, which we've lost when we have kind of dehumanized animals and turned them into industrial machine to make meat. I believe that cultivated meat is a better alternative to this situation where we have dehumanized, I don't know if we can use this term, animals. We prefer just taking the animal out of the equation, and the animals we farming them in a more extensive way, less industrial, and rebuilding this connection with animals. So we do see actually some potential ethical benefits with this issue. In terms of religious points, so we've been talking actually quite a lot with both Muslim and Jewish communities and religious authorities, which don't see any ethical issue with it. In the Christian world, some specific movement might be a bit more extreme with using cells, as they are also with some medical treatments. That's something we're looking at. Anyway, our goal is not to make animal farming obsolete. Our goal is to provide an additional option to the consumers, which would supplement sustainable farming. So we're not kind of pushing for consumption of cultivated meat. Who prefers eating meat harvested from a slaughtered animal is, of course, will continue to do it. But providing the options, I believe, is very important.
Didier, people are really excited about your startup. Me and Nicole, we prepared a lot of questions, but there is so many here in the chat, so we are going to continue with that. And I will combine Leonardo and Luis Francisco questions and talk a little bit about impact. In your presentation, you talked about that, and ESG is really a big word now. And from the environmental part of impact is really easy to understand when you think about the environmental part of the ESG. But let's talk about social. Leonardo asks you if this meat will be cheaper than regular cow meat. He also wants to know when we're going to see it in markets. But Luis also asks if this can help to control the hunger in the world. So I would like to understand from the social point of view how our farms can help the world.
Well, that's a great question. It's a large question as well. There are a lot of potential social implications of cultivated meat, and we're really doing our best to take those into account as we build the company and contribute to structuring this industry. On the selling price, I believe meat is very cheap today, and I don't think that the goal of other farms is to compete on price. On the long term, it might be that the production cost of cultivated meat will be lower than conventional animal farming, just because the amount of resources we need are lower. we have zero waste, and we use exactly the resources required to make the meat, versus sustaining the animal for, let's say, 2 years, slaughtering it, and then meat represents only 25 to 30% of the body weight of the animal. The rest are internal organs or hides or bones, which are many times used as byproducts, by the way. They're not necessarily thrown away, but we're more efficient in terms of resource use. So we might be less costly to produce. That's not necessarily the point, I believe. Regarding the developing world and the global south, we're working actually in terms of social impact on 2 levels. One level is to improve food security. We're working very closely, for instance, in the Middle East with the state of Israel, but also with the state of the UAE, which is a direct investor in Elephant, one of their sovereign funds. Singapore is also invested in Elephants through one of their sovereign funds, and is also developing food security programs 30 by 30. China has imported 90% of its meat and suffers from significant food security issues. Japan, and we believe that the next wars will be driven by food security problems. We've seen the high stress on the global supply chain starting, before COVID and being amplified by COVID, and the cost of shipment have been increased, I believe, by 350% shipment since 2019. And if we don't make sure that we can produce the meat locally in the countries, in Israel, we import 88% of our beef because we don't have the land, water, and the climate suitable for farming animals for meat. So one aspect is to provide new production systems which can produce meat and beef where it's not produced today, and secure food and high quality nutrition for anyone, anytime and anywhere. And that's I believe a big contribution to the geopolitical stability in the Middle East. For instance, I believe that food security collaboration will be a cement of the regional peace. And we do see it as a driver behind a more regional collaboration and geopolitical stability. We're sharing the same issues of not being able to produce all the food we need. That's a big issue. But that's a social positive impact, we believe. And in terms of the developing world and providing meat to remote communities in Africa, for instance, or in remote places in Asia or in villages in South America, I believe it will take more time. It will probably be in the second stage. Once we drive the curve cost down enough and increase the scale to a point when the production cost is in line with the requirements of those specific geographies, our goal is to be there as well. That's a bit a long answer, but I think it's a very important issue. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we provide social justice and that we're part of a transition which is not only based on climate or environment, which is nice, but it's just one aspect of the world. At the end of the day, we have to make sure we develop policies and approaches hand in hand with the different stakeholders, with the regulators, with the governments, which are first good for the people themselves.
Definitely. And we have one more question here from the audience, from Jessica. She would like to know what the greater difficulties are in building the large-scale process.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great question. One of the big challenges as I mentioned during the presentation, is the ability to scale up to very large production capabilities and to drive the cost down in parallel. And if we'd like to kind of detail a bit more, break down a bit more the different questions or issues we deal with, it's connected to the abilities to scale up a biological process. Cultivated meat is not no, at the end of the day, we deal with the cells, which are living organisms. when you have a purely mechanical or industrial process, it's easier to scale than when you're dealing with a biological phenomenon like cells, which grow and divide and arrange themselves into this mid structure. The cells are very sensitive to the conditions, to the growth conditions, to shear force during the production, to pressure, to change in physical, pH, CO2, O2 saturation, the ability to optimize the process so that we can get more cells quicker in order to reduce the cost, because the time required for producing the meat has a direct impact on the total cost. We have developed a few what we call bioprocesses, processes for increasing the yield of growing the cells to reduce the cost. All those questions are quite significant, and that comes also to the point of the equipment itself. In principle, to the equipment and to the growth medium, which is the feed to the cells, many companies started just by using cultivators or bioreactors. It's the second name for the same equipment, developed for the biomedical industry, and use growth medium, which are replacing the blood, actually feeding the cells with all they need, and also developed for the biomedical industry, which originally were incorporating animal components such as fetal serum or things like that, which are not suitable for cultivated meat. So we need to reinvent a lot of the base, of the foundations of the production process, have a lower cost equipment, develop a different growth medium, animal-free, optimized for cost, optimized for yield. It's a lot of work. It's not enough just to assemble existing technologies and to scale them up. We're really rethinking from scratch the foundations of cell culture.
Thank you, Didier. And we are almost approaching the end of our event. And of course, I will ask you about money. We know that the funding process is really hard when you have deep tech, when you have a product. You are in Israel. We know that we have a lot of VC money there, and you also have recently have an investment from a big celebrity, from Leonardo DiCaprio. Could you please tell us, it was easy to raise money? It was difficult? Why? How can we help? Your experience can help other entrepreneurs that have a project like this to make the funding.
Yeah, I think the closer we get to the market, and by the way, we should have, we're planning an initial launch around the end of 2022 with the thin cuts of beef, and again, pending two regulatory approvals. We need regulatory clearance to sell our meat, so it's not 100% under our control, but we'll be ready internally to start selling our product at small scale around the end of next year. Probably not in Brazil. The regulation in Brazil will take more time. Again, we're at earlier stage there. We're working on it. The closer we get to commercialization, the more questions were asked, because when we started the company, it was investors were bought in by the vision and the potential, both the impact potential, the commercial potential. Now that we get closer to the commercialization phase, investors drill much more into the details of the scale-up plan, of the cost reduction plan, of the commercialization, go-to-market, marketing plans. So I would say that it requires probably more time and more material to really convince and deliver all the information they need. On the other hand, it makes this type of projects much more tangible. Until 2-3 years, many investors were still, sitting on the side and learning the space, but were not yet ready to pull the trigger. They weren't sure whether companies will have the capabilities to really bring products to the market at a cost and based on a production platform which would be suitable for large scale. I think that today we have demonstrated that. So on one hand, it requires more work to raise money, and I think it's good that investors are doing their homework and they're checking in depth, the real assets of this type of companies. On the other hand, we do see more investors who are coming to play. Later stage investors, larger investors, institutional investors who invested in other funds and maybe in one other company, and which I haven't invested in the past in the space. So your answer is the answer to your question is yes and no.
Excellent. And Didier, now we still have 4 minutes. So going back to your very successful career as a businessman, we'd like to ask you one final question, which is, what piece of advice would you give Brazilian entrepreneurs?
Wow, I think that I would say that in my views, there are two attributes which are important in entrepreneurship. The first one is humility, and the second one is resilience. I think that entrepreneurs need to be able to listen. I mean, when you're an entrepreneur, usually, the initial, let's say, attitude is to be very confident in your solution and to be enthusiastic about what you do. I think it's necessary, but it's also a pitfall. You need also to be able to accept feedbacks, to integrate feedbacks, to listen to the different stakeholders in the ecosystem, to make sure your solution fits into the existing system, to make sure your solution is actually bringing a benefit to the stakeholders and is not just a technological exercise to develop something new. And for that, you really need to listen, to be attentive, and to be able to respect and other opinions and to listen to the other stakeholders. That's let's say the humility. And the second one, resilience. Cultivated Meat, when we started the project in 2016, even before we founded the company in 2017, it was the chances to succeed were probably 1 in 100. Today it's probably 60 in 100. It's not yet 100 in 100. There's still some risk and challenges, but I believe we've made along a good way. You really need to stick to your vision. You need to be agile to adapt when needed, but you really need to stick to your vision and to be able to lead this your project even when the chances are low. So it's a combination of both, which are sometimes conflicting one with the other: humility and resilience.
Wonderful, Didier. Really, thank you so much for answering anything that we asked you in this very, very open way. We wish you all the success, and we really need different entrepreneurs and different products to build a better world for we all. Thank you all that joined us today. It's the last edition of Café com Homus this year, but next year we are going to meet again. Sahi, your final words.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Magda, Sahi, Nicole, and everyone for having me. And anyone in the audience, feel free to reach out to me at any time directly if you have any further questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maria. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. And it's actually also a Jewish holiday in Israel, Hanukkah, which is the holiday of doing miracles. So hopefully we are part of a miracle coming to life. Chag Sameach, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you.